position. So for flexion abdominals position, you don't want to be too close to the wall. I'm just going to pull my t-shirt up so I can show you why. I want you to feel like your coccyx is on the floor. So if you're really close to the wall, and this is just dependent basically on your hip mobility, you might find that if you're too close, your whole bum lifts up and under, and you're sort of then rounding your lower back. We don't want that happening. So this is not me flexing my hips, I'm flexing my lower back here. I want the pelvis to be flat on the floor so that the lower back can lengthen, and this is the kind of hinge point of the equation. It's the hip inflection, not the lower back inflection. And I'm obviously exaggerating this because most people won't be as tucked under as that. But if you feel like there is any kind of airspace between your bottom or your coccyx, your tailbone, scoot yourself slightly further away so that the priority is keeping your sacrum, which is like the flat triangle platey bit at the very bottom of your spine, part of your pelvis. You've got to keep your sacrum on the floor. Like, can you see there how my spine is nice and long? I'm not tucking under and then rounding through my spine. That's going to really change whether or not we get the shoulder release that we want to get in the next part of the exercise. I'm going to keep my knees pinched together. So I'm keeping that tailbone on the floor, trying to keep my pelvis as level as my body will let me. My knees are pinched together, and then I'm going to walk my feet out to the side. Don't over egg this, because you've got to think about your pelvis again. So if you take your feet too far, you might then notice that the pelvis starts tucking under and away. So find a position where the knees are touching, but you're still keeping that coccyx and that tailbone on, the tailbone on the floor. The outside edge of your feet are parallel and facing up. So you are not using your big toe to measure the position of your feet because they're going to be splayed out to the side. You're pivoting around that ankle so that the outside edge of the foot is in a straight line and your feet are facing parallel up to the ceiling. You're going to keep a gentle squeezing together of the knees. Don't over-egg that too much. It'll start changing and things will start happening. And you've got to try and keep that slight grounding through the coccyx throughout. So my spine is staying long. I'm not tucking under in my pelvis. The bolster is behind me because whilst we're doing this thing that's going to realign our pelvis and our hips, we're going to take our arms overhead. So this is shoulder flexion. And we're going to be nice and gentle with like how far we push it. So the reason that you might need a whole bunch of pillows is because you've got to see how your rib cage reacts to this. If you are trying to take your arms too far behind, your for the flexibility of your shoulders, your rib cage will puff up. Okay, so hopefully you can see there that as I take my arms behind me, my rib cage is lifted off the floor, which has put my spine into extension. And I don't want that. I want my rib cage to be grounded. So what is not important is how far behind me my arms go. I don't care about this part of the movement. What I care about is that my bottom of my ribs stay grounded on the floor. And can you watch my ribs there? There's no movement or lifting up through my rib cage as I take my arms behind me. If I didn't have the bolster and I put my hands on the floor, I'm probably just about all right actually, but it's very on the edge of then I'm going to start to lift my rib cage there to compensate. I'm not opening my shoulders here, I'm just putting a bit too much pressure in my lower back. So prioritize your rib cage and your pelvis more than the shoulders, and magically you're going to get more from your shoulders, okay? Don't over-egg the shoulders and the arms because that's going to make you more likely to compensate from elsewhere. So all we're going to do is spend 5 minutes here squeezing our knees together, trying to lightly engage our abdominals to sort of pull our rib cage down to the floor. You're just going to be completely passive in your arms and in your hands, palms facing up. Make sure your elbows are as close to your ears as possible. So tight shoulders are going to want to go wide. When people can't flex their shoulders, that movement there, it's the elbow moving directly over the shoulder girdle. What will happen is the arms will abduct. So they'll go out to the side, which isn't wrong, but it's not shoulder flexion. That's abduction and flexion. We're trying to teach flexion. So make sure that your elbows are kind of close to your head, okay? Keep breathing in and out of your nose. Keep pulling that bottom part of your rib cage down to the floor gently. Gentle squeezing in with the knees. Your hands and arms and shoulders are just relaxing. And over the course of the 5 minutes, you might feel like you can start reducing the height of the thing behind you. I'm not going to do that because I think it's beneficial. I can see, even because this is how tight I am in my shoulders, even in that position with the bolster, I'm on the verge of my rib cage wanting to lift. So it's more beneficial for me to teach that habit out of my body than be competitive about how far behind me my arms move. Okay, 5 minutes here, off we go. Okay. Breathing in and out of the nose and into the belly. We're not overly using our feet to push onto the wall. We're keeping the knees pinned together, trying to keep the pelvis on the floor so the bottom part of the pelvis is not lifting up. If it is, scooch a bit further back from the wall. Keeping our rib cage grounded, so there's no lifting through the rib cage. Back of the ribs, the full portion of the back of the ribs is on the floor. And I'm trying to make sure that my elbows are kind of close to my ears and not too far out to the side. I'm breathing, and the only bits of me that are active are my knees, and there's a little bit of work going on in my abdominals to pull that rib cage down. Be careful when you pull the rib cage down that you don't then lose that pelvic position that we're talking about. So if you overly engage your abdominals and really flatten the rib cage, you might then be tempted to kind of tuck under and lift your bum up. You're trying to find this sweet spot where the pelvis stays flat but the rib cage is sort of drawing in. And breathe. And just noticing differences in your arms, differences in your hips maybe, in your pelvis, in how your rib cage feels on the ground. I've got a twisted rib cage, which means I've got like a little bit of scoliosis in my spine. No, it's not something I was born with, it's something that's developed due to some bad movement habits over the last few years. I didn't used to have it. But this is a really good exercise for me to reduce my scoliosis, so I can literally feel my like rib cage untwisting as my hips and pelvis kind of settle and balance, and as the shoulders have this opportunity to kind of free themselves and let go. Keep squeezing the knees together. Rib cage kind of draws in so we're not flaring. And we're about halfway through, but I really, really want you to tune into how this feels, because it's really important for all of the exercises that we're about to do. So the biggest problem when it comes to this shoulder flexion is that people lift their rib cage, they don't move their arms. And you need to get a sense of how it feels to have your rib cage moving kind of in the opposite direction of what your arm and shoulder are doing. It's pivotal for the rest of the movements today, but if you want to teach this movement to your body, the rib cage isn't the thing that's moving, it's the arms and the shoulders. Breathing into any tension here. I can really feel my rib cage like de-twisting. I'm sort of consciously shifting myself slightly just to allow where my like knot of scoliosis is, it like changes, and then I can kind of untuck my rib cage slightly and it feels really good. 1.5 minutes left, just over. Keep breathing. Don't let those elbows creep too wide, which you might notice that they are. Rib cage draws down. Just over 1 minute left. Keep breathing. Are we noticing things change? I'm definitely noticing things change. I think I'm going to walk my feet out slightly further for this like final minute. So as my body's kind of settled into it, I can push my hips into internal rotation a little bit more than I could before. If you do that, really make sure that the toes are not wider than the ankles. So you're keeping the toes in that parallel position, pulling the rib cage down, but tilting the coccyx a little bit into the floor. So pulling the rib cage down for most people will result in them bringing the coccyx up off the floor, and you've got to find that sweet spot where there's a different motion happening from the rib cage through to the pelvis. Ten seconds left. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're staying in an extremely similar position, and you're going to use your bolster or your cushions again for the next exercise.